My wife discussed her pregnancy in German with her boss. I replied in fluent German. They thought I was furniture. That's the only way to describe it. For 18 months, I had sat silently in the corner of every company dinner, every holiday party, every casual after-work gathering at that overpriced brewery near the office. I smiled. I nodded. I shook hands firmly. I said nice to meet you in careful, accented English, and then I retreated to my designated role, the spouse. The plus one, the quiet American who didn't understand a word they were saying. My wife Lena had warned me about Klaus. Her boss was a formidable man 57 years old, silver-haired with the kind of effortless authority that comes from 30 years at the same company. He spoke English well enough when clients were present, but among his own people he preferred the sharp, efficient rhythms of his native German. And when he learned that Lena's husband was an American who could barely order a coffee in Berlin without sounding like a tourist, he made a point of speaking German exclusively around me. At first I played along. I let them think I was harmless. I let them think the only German words I knew were Bitten Danke and ein Bier. Bitte. I watched their faces relax into that subtle condescension, the way people's faces do when they believe you cannot understand them, the way they lean in a little closer to each other, lower their voices just slightly, and speak as if the foreigner in the room has suddenly turned into a potted plant. It was humiliating, and it was useful, because the truth is, I learned German in college. I minored in it. I spent a semester in Vienna reading Rilke in the original. I can discuss German case declensions in my sleep. My accent is indistinguishable from a native speaker's if I want it to be, and for the past year and a half, I have chosen not to want it. I have been listening to everything. I heard Klaus mock my tie at the Christmas party last year. Typisch Amerikaner, so breit wie ein Vorhang. Typical American. As wide as a curtain. I smiled and asked him where the restroom was in broken English. He patted my shoulder like I was a Labrador. I heard him complain that Lena was wasting time on a project that would have been finished faster if she weren't so emotional. I heard him speculate that she only got hired because the company needed to fill a diversity quota. I heard him laugh with his deputy, Dieter, about how Lena's American husband was probably unemployed and living off her salary. I said nothing. I smiled. I waited. The night everything changed was a Tuesday. Lena came home from work pale and trembling. She had just returned from her 12-week ultrasound. We had been trying for 2 years. 2 years of negative tests, of hope and disappointment, of doctor's appointments and silent tears in the dark. And now, finally, a heartbeat. Strong and fast, like a tiny drum. But Klaus had scheduled a mandatory strategy meeting for the same afternoon as her follow-up appointment. When Lena asked to reschedule, he refused. When she explained why tentatively, nervously because she had not yet announced her pregnancy to anyone, he waved his hand dismissively. "We'll discuss it tomorrow," he said. In German. He always switched to German when he wanted to assert dominance. So Lena did something she had never done before. She called his bluff. The next morning, she walked into his office, closed the door, and told him in German that she was pregnant, that her appointments were non-negotiable, and that she would require accommodations under company policy. Her German is good, she's been here for 7 years, but she was nervous. Her voice shook. Her hands trembled around the paper cup of herbal tea she was pretending to enjoy. Klaus listened. Then he leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and delivered his response, also in German, of course. He assumed I wasn't there. He assumed Lena would go home and translate the conversation for me later, softening the edges, protecting me from the full ugliness of what he said. But I was there. I had driven Lena to work that day because her car was in the shop. I was sitting in the waiting area outside Klaus's glass-walled office, pretending to scroll through my phone. The door was slightly ajar. I heard every word. "You've made a poor decision, Lena," Klaus said, his voice calm and measured, the way people speak when they are about to be cruel on purpose. "Pregnancy at your career stage is impractical. You've only been with us for 2 years. You haven't proven yourself yet. And now you expect us to rearrange our entire schedule for your personal choices." Lena started to respond, but he cut her off. "Let me be clear. The accommodations you're requesting are technically required by law. I'm aware of that, but the law doesn't require me to give you interesting projects when you return. It doesn't require me to recommend you for promotion. It doesn't require me to remember your name when I'm deciding who gets laid off in the next restructuring." He paused, letting the threat settle. You should think very carefully about how much you want to fight for these accommodations. Some fights are not worth winning. Lena was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing, those small, swallowed gasps she makes when she's trying not to sob. I have heard that sound exactly 4 times in our marriage, when her grandmother died, when we got the first negative pregnancy test, when we got the 10th, and now. I stood up. I walked to the door of Klaus's office. I pushed it open without knocking. Both of them turned to look at me. Lena with confusion, Klaus with annoyance. He opened his mouth to tell me to wait outside in English, because he was a gracious host who accommodated the poor language-limited American. I didn't let him speak. Herr Klaus, I said in German so flawless, so precise, so perfectly inflected that his face went blank with shock. Lassen Sie mich Sie herstellen, dass ich Sie wichtig verstanden habe. Let me make sure I understood you correctly. He blinked. I continued, stepping fully into the room. Sie haben gerade damit gedroht, die Karriere meiner Frau zu zerstören, weil sie es gewagt hat, schwanger zu werden. Sie wird gesagt, dass das Gesetz sie nicht daran hindern kann, sie zu bestrafen, solange sie es umstrafen, solange sie es über ihr Lug stellen. Sie haben eine schwangere Frau zum Weinen gebracht, weil sie etwas gebeten hat, das ihr rechtmäßig suchte. You just threatened to destroy my wife's career because she dared to become pregnant. You said the law can't stop you from punishing her as long as you're subtle enough. You made a pregnant woman cry for asking for something that is legally hers. Klaus's mouth opened and closed like a fish. His silver hair seemed suddenly less distinguished, more like the plumage of a startled bird. He looked at Lena, then back at me, trying to calculate how much trouble he was in. I smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Ich habe Jedi sein Zelmut aufgenommen, I said. I have recorded every single word. His face went gray. It was true. My phone had been in my pocket, voice memo running, since the moment I heard Lena's breathing change. I had learned over 18 months of being treated like furniture to always be recording when Klaus was around. Not for revenge. Not at first. Just for my own sanity so I could listen back later, translate the insults I had pretended not to understand and remind myself that I wasn't paranoid. He really was that much of an asshole. Now, that habit was about to become a nuclear weapon. I have 18 months of recordings, Herr Klaus, I continued in German. Christmas party comments. Performance reviews where you told female employees they should smile more. The time you suggested that our colleague Fatima's headscarf was unprofessional. The time you told the intern from accounting that she had such a pretty face and then asked why she was wasting it, on spreadsheets. Lena was staring at me like she had never seen me before. In a way, she hadn't. I am going to give you one chance, I said. 1. You will approve every accommodation my wife requests. You will give her a written apology. You will personally ensure that she receives interesting projects, fair promotions, and the respect she has earned. And you will never ever speak to her or any other employee like that again. Klaus found his voice. You can't blackmail me. This isn't blackmail, I interrupted. This is a courtesy. Blackmail is when I demand money. I'm demanding decency. There's a difference. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up. If you don't agree, I walk out of this office and straight to the labor board. I send these recordings to every news outlet in Berlin. I post them on LinkedIn. I tag the CEO. I tag the board. I tag your wife, who I believe works in HR at a different company and might be very interested to hear how you talk about working women when she's not in the room. Klaus looked at Lena. She had stopped crying. She was watching him with an expression I had never seen on her face before, not anger exactly, something colder, something that looked like the end of patience. He caved. It took him about 30 seconds. He stammered. He blustered. He made a half-hearted attempt to claim he was just joking, but when I started playing back the recording of his threat, his own voice, saying, "Some fights are not worth winning," in that oily, condescending tone, he signed the accommodation request on the spot. He wrote the apology letter while I watched. He even agreed to attend mandatory harassment training, which I suspect he needed more than anyone else in that company. We walked out together, Lena and I. She didn't speak until we reached the elevator. Then she turned to me, her eyes still red, but her mouth curling into something that was half laugh, half sob. "You speak German," she said. "I speak German," I agreed. For 18 months, you let them call you an idiot to your face. I let them call me an idiot in a language they thought I didn't understand. That's different. The elevator doors opened. I gestured for her to step inside. Also, for the record, I did not record the conversation where Dieter called my tie wide as a curtain. That one, I just enjoyed. She laughed. It was the best sound I had heard in months. The fallout was minimal for us and catastrophic for Klaus. The recordings never went public. They didn't need to. Klaus's terror was enough. He spent the next 6 months walking on eggshells around Lena, approving every request instantly, complimenting her work loudly whenever anyone else was in earshot. Dieter suddenly became very friendly. The Christmas party that year featured 0 German comments about my wardrobe. And when Lena went on maternity leave, Klaus threw her a party. He bought a cake. He gave a speech about what a valued team member she was. He looked directly at me when he said it, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Respect, mixed with fear. That was almost as satisfying as the recordings. I still have them, by the way. All 18 months worth. Saved in 3 different locations, encrypted, password protected. I think of them as insurance not just for Lena, but for every woman in that office who Klaus ever made cry. He doesn't know that I've shared copies with the company's general counsel, who happens to be a woman, and who happens to have a very long memory for this sort of thing. He just knows that the quiet American is not so quiet anymore, and that some languages are best spoken when nobody expects you to understand them at all.